So, you are releasing a book, Pirate Ghosts and Buried Treasure of the Southeast Coast, a historical assessment of pirate folklore.
Yes. So I've been working on the book for about the last 4.5 years. It's been a very lengthy process, very on and off. Of course, there's other projects that I've tended to throughout the years as well, running my shipwrecked page and doing all my various side projects. But constantly in the background of everything, I've been working consistently on the book for, again, about 4.5 years, something close to that.
Yeah, you got to introduce yourself too. I mean, we should do that. We should do it right off the bat. Come on.
Yeah, yeah, I suppose. All right. I
Because
guess in
I
that
am
case,
noticing something. People on YouTube are not
yeah,
always the same people as those on Facebook.
that's true.
It's
All
like
right.
just the other
Well,
month, I got asked, like, where'd I get this document from? It's like, shipwreck with Captain Marrow. Oh, you don't know. Okay.
so I guess for those of you watching who are unfamiliar with what I do, my name is Adam Marrow, but I typically go by Captain Marrow. Uh, Through that name, I run the Shipwrecked with Captain Marrow Facebook page. I do have a Tumblr, an Instagram, and a YouTube as well, but Facebook is my primary platform. Typically, I've been writing history articles on mostly a daily basis for, I don't know, over 3 years now on Facebook. And then in addition to that, I travel up and down the Southeast coast, exploring pirate relevant sites, not always just historical, but, places that are alleged to be haunted and anywhere where there's like pirate folklore as well. Uh, Other than that, I also interact a lot with the overall pirate community, including those who do festivals, not just reenactors, other artists and vendors and authors. And by this point, I know a lot of people. He's down here. Um, but I guess that's me for the most part.
So, what got you into pirate stuff? Let's go there.
So basically, when it comes to how I got into pirate stuff, uh, like most people, there's an interest at a young age. Uh, I was about 4 years old or so when they came out with the pirate brand of Legos. Uh, Not too long afterwards, Muppets Treasure Island came out. That was around the same time as the Page Master, which also had pirate stuff in it. Uh, see, Cutthroat Island, and then pirate interest kind of just remained throughout the rest of my life. Every now and then, like new stuff would pop up. Pirates of the Caribbean would come out. I'd be like, okay, that's pretty cool, and I liked it. Was Assassin's Creed Black Flag came out in 2010, I want to say. Black Sails came out in 2014, I think. Yeah, I think it's 14. But in any case, pirate stuff kept popping up, and I've been interested in it, since I was a child. But I really started delving into it in 2018. That's really when I decided to make it a primary focus. Um, Bottom line is, unfortunately, in 2018, my mother passed away like 3 days before my birthday. It wasn't a great birthday, and I had birthday money. I didn't really know what to spend it on. All I wanted back was my mom. But there was a pirate game that just came out called Sea of Thieves, and I'm like, okay, well, things aren't so great in general in life right now. Let's try it, whatever. So I got Sea of Thieves, and I just completely immersed myself into it. When I wasn't playing Sea of Thieves, I was thinking about it. Uh, I wanted to do pirate stuff outside of Sea of Thieves. I saw people who created cosplay outfits of characters for the game, and they were wearing them to like gaming conventions and such. I'm like, man, that would be cool, but like it would be cooler if I had like a more realistic looking pirate outfit. And then I also realized at that point in time, for the first time ever in 2018, that there are people who do reenactment stuff other than just Civil War and Rev War. Because up until that point in time, living in Michigan and then moving down here to South Carolina in 2006, literally anytime I heard the word reenactor, I always thought that was only Civil War and Rev War. I've never heard of anyone doing any other eras. So I was excited to see that there was people who did pirate stuff as well. So I started putting together my own outfit. Uh, the plan was I was going to try to like hardcore go the YouTube route, but bottom line is, when it comes to talking in front of a camera, I don't want to say I'm a little bit camera shy, but I'm not as comfortable as I am actually acting with the public. I found myself enjoying writing more. Like I have no problem talking with people, random strangers on the beach, people at festivals, people that like have never heard of me, people that are like, oh, I followed your page for years. Like I can chit chat with those people comfortably. I can talk to a crowd, but recording in front of a camera, I don't know. I just feel awkward. It's cold and dead. But in any case, so yeah, then I started writing, looking into history stuff. I already knew a decent chunk of pirate history before that point, because growing up early, I was homeschooled. I was actually homeschooled from grade 3 to graduation. I graduated at age 16, and throughout that time period, it was kind of the way that the homeschooling was handled was there was a certain criteria that had to be met at the end of each year to, I guess legally move on to the next grade.
Yeah.
Like there were still state requirements, but for the most part, whatever was taught in the curriculum, like there was certain things that had to be taught, and then there was like leeway, there was room to squeeze in wherever you wanted. So I kind of got this experience where I got to learn whatever I wanted to learn in school instead of learning whatever the teacher decided to force you to learn. So I kept focusing on stuff like pirates and Egyptian mythology and Norse mythology and ancient cultures. And I will say I'm not like super well versed when it comes to American history outside of the colonial period. Once you start getting up into like Rev War and Civil War and stuff, like I know some of the basics, but in any case, so I've always liked pirate stuff, and I kind of got exposed to it early on. And when I came down here, and then my mom passed away, like I've just, yeah, that's everything. I'm just the pirate dude now.
One of the things I really enjoyed about reading this book,
Mhm.
and I really think a lot of the Carolinas could do with this, was George Raynor.
Mhm.
Because I had no clue.
What up?
I really didn't know much about him until your book, and then literally when I was doing my research for my videos, I'm like, wait, this guy, whoa, okay, this is where'd he come from? What's
Yeah,
going on?
yeah, he's got a lot to do with down here. He's probably the first like, more obscure pirate that you learn about when you're down here in the Carolinas. Uh, like I had mentioned before previously, whenever you start looking around in Charleston and stuff, they don't really advertise their pirate history too well at all. But whenever you do go to the places that do have pirate history, everything is Blackbeard, everything is Steed Bonnet. Uh, every now and then there will be a mention of like Anne Bonny or something like that. But when you start like actually looking into South Carolina pirate history, one of the names that pop up a little bit earlier is George Raynor. And George Raynor, super relevant for Charleston, never credited as such, but he and his crew came here in 1692. And yeah, they basically, how do we say this? He arrived with his men from the Red Sea. And then when he arrived, he pretty much made a deal with the town, handed over all the guns on his ship, all the stuff from his ship, including all the sails and rigging. That was all documented as being sold down at the docks of the Charlestown Harbor. I believe I've read that somewhere. There's like a whole entire list of everything that was sold on the Charlestown docks. So regarding as to what became of his cannons, I actually need to look over that if I can find that again and see if that was a thing. I mean, I know they weren't sold, they were donated to the town.
Yeah.
But in any case, yeah, George Raynor stayed here for a couple of years before relocating back up north to Connecticut. And from there he goes back out with Thomas too. You're fully aware of that now. But yeah, he and his crew down here, a lot of them settled down in Charleston, others split different ways.
One of them went to Maryland.
Yes. But yeah, so Raynor was like one of the early ones that I learned about, trying to uncover everything I could about Charleston pirate history down here. And yeah, as mentioned in the book, there are some folklore entries on him, namely the fact that he owned an entire island down here that spawned a little bit of folklore. And
Mine aren't here.
but yes, spawned a lot of folklore down here. And while I was going through and researching the book, I was actually in contact with one of George Raynor's descendants. I found him. His name is Robert Raynor. He lives here locally. I don't remember which town exactly, but he's he's also an author as well. He's published a book called Exploring Bull's Island, which is one of the islands that George Raynor he's allegedly buried treasure at. But I had a little bit of conversation with him back and forth during like the research process. That was, I don't know, maybe 2 years ago, something like that. Nice guy though.
I have my own theories on this because I was running into a very similar thing today, actually at 2:30 this morning, hence my I found a of all things it was one of the captains who was running supplies back to Madagascar crash landed in Cape May, New Jersey, and all these different
Okay.
pirates were on his ship and they just disappeared, ran off, bribed the governor, all these different things.
Scrambled in every direction.
And when you go to Cape May today, you might hear, oh, there were pirates here at some point.
Mhm.
Look at Blackbeard and Bonnie. It's like, but that
Right.
has nothing to do with. So my question to you is, why do you think that is with even the sites in your area?
So I've actually had this conversation before with other historians, and I believe what I feel like it's been narrowed down to be is the fact that during the buccaneering age, everything leading up to about 1700, 1703, 1704, whenever the Queen Anne's War, 1703, right?
Yeah,
1704.
yeah.
In any case, leading up to that point in time, during the 17th century, a lot of the documentation that you get that has to do with all the different pirates, a lot of it comes from naval reports and journal entries and written letters from governors to other places. For the most part, while people were aware that, I guess, pirate stuff was going on, like, it didn't fill the newspapers all the time. But whenever you have like Queen Anne's War, and then afterwards, all these other pirates that started doing stuff, amid the Flying Gang and all that operating out of Nassau, those, I don't want to say became household names because they probably didn't until Charles Johnson's like bestseller book.
Yeah.
But leading up to then, those were names that appeared in the newspapers over and over and over and over. So they had a good start. Everyone else, like, for example, during the buccaneering age, I've always been a fan of John Coxon. He has a lot going on. He did a lot of stuff. A lot of it's super impressive. I'm not sure if you've looked into him very much, but I mean, he was in prison multiple times. He kept escaping from prison. He was sentenced to be hanged, I want to say twice. He kept escaping from jail. Like, he was definitely the historical, like, this was almost the day you captured John Coxon. But despite all of his accomplishments, sailing around in an actual man of war, I believe it was a Spanish galleon that he took at one point in time that he was using. Like, super impressive accomplishments, but no one knows his name. But then you have other pirates that, are small time pirates. Like, you have, Jack Rackham and Anne Bonny and Mary Read, and they assaulted some fishing vessels over the course of 2 months, and everyone knows their name. And I assume it just comes down to, how they pumped those names into the newspapers. So I believe it's the same thing. I believe that is stuck around until today with all the historic sites. The same names that were repeated over and over and over back then are repeated over and over now. And the more obscure ones, they've been left out. And like, you really don't come across those names unless you really start digging for them and try to find something beyond the surface level of pirate history.
Yeah, the diggings on my end, I'm starting to think the reason a lot of the ones up here are forgotten, they were bribing governors.
Potentially that is
One
well.
of the towns that I've visited before, New Jersey, just found out like one of the founding fathers of that town made most of his money illegally selling slaves. I'm like, maybe this is like, yeah, he was an interloper, and then the slavery thing kind of became not so popular.
Right.
And I sometimes wonder, like, is this kind of like where some of these sites, like, they're not intentionally lying to people. They just, it's
Right.
somewhere in the handbook from years ago. Don't mention this.
So when you got a chance to flip through the book and check it out and stuff, did you ever get around to the entry regarding Bonnet's Creek in North Carolina, Cape Fear River area?
Yes, yes, yes.
There was a character from pirate folklore that somehow made it into historical fact onto a historic plaque. Did you catch that? Yeah, so that was the reverse happens as well. Sometimes you end up with fake characters making their way into history. As for those of you listening, that has to do with a historical plaque associated with Stede Bonnet and the Battle of the Cape Fear River, or the Battle of the Sandbars. And when it mentions all the various pirates in the area, you know, it of course calls out Stede Bonnet and Blackbeard, but also it also calls out Marianne Blythe, stating that this is the location that she it was a meeting place. They said it was a meeting place for her. But when you start actually looking into history, you're like, oh, okay, there's something up with this name, because she's listed on the plaque as just Marianne Blythe, the what was it, one of the few buccaneering women or something, I think is what they called her. But yeah, this is a historic plaque. And like when you start looking into it, she actually comes from a fiction story from the 1950s. And the full title is Marianne Blythe, the G-string buccaneer. It had to do with a woman who wore nothing but a G-string and pirate bucket boots and led an entirely female derived crew who would go around seducing other sailors from their ship, and they did pirate stuff. It was a short story and a collection of other, you know, fictional short stories of the time. Somehow through translation, someone heard that somehow and thought it was real, and that got passed on to someone else and to someone else, and then it appeared in like a folklore book, a very short entry. By the time it made it into the folklore book in 2006, regarding folklore of the local area, I believe it's Brunswick County. By that point in time, all of the ridiculousness of the fiction story is gone. It just mentions her as Marianne Blythe, the female buccaneer, and that she used the area as a meeting place, and doesn't have anything else to extrapolate on. But other people reading about it, who pick up that local folklore book, you know, learning the folklore of their region, they come across and like, oh, cool, Marianne Blythe, there was a female pirate that used this location. But yeah,
Others I know about it, other than your book, I saw a Facebook post of all things. It's
yeah.
Wait, what? This what? This is real?
Yep, I made a whole entire post about it and everything. I got a picture of that plaque. I took a picture with the plaque. And like, I just don't know how that got approved. It's an engraved metal plate. It will be there forever until they change it out. We'll see.
Well, at this point, it's kind of, it's funny now. So now they kind of
got. Oh yeah, yeah. I kind of want them to keep it, but it does mislead people.
Out of all the sites that you've visited, written about, which one's your favorite? Why? Like, give some background on it.
Like the actual site or the lore behind the site?
The lore behind it. Like,
okay, because not every site is exciting. There's plenty of very uninteresting places that have cool history. So favorite place that I've visited that has cool history. It's a toss-up. I've been to a lot of the locations. I mean, I have not been able to get to every single place in my book, especially a lot of South Florida. But of the places I've been to that are in my book that I feel have interesting entries. So the book covers the concept of not just buried treasure myths, but also alleged hauntings and so on. It's all the pirate ghost stories as well. And when it comes to ghost stories, I guess the word is a skeptic. Like I don't totally disbelieve in it, but I also don't like fully believe in it. And that's the perspective that I've written the book from as well. Like I'm not here to say that ghosts aren't real. I'm not here telling you that this place is 100% haunted. But one of the locations I went to was in Colonial Williamsburg. I did go to the location where Blackbeard's crew was held at the old jail, which looks like it's spelled Gaul, but that's just the old spelling for jail. The old Gaul. So supposedly the place is haunted by pirates. Blackbeard's crew who met their end there in Colonial Williamsburg, those that were hanged. It's also reportedly haunted by other individuals as well. And there's not really too much of a strong story there. It's just a simple claim that it's haunted by the crew. But we did go to that location. We went there after midnight. We went there around maybe 1 a.m. or something. I was there earlier during the day, when they were actually open as well. But Colonial Williamsburg, have you been before? I don't recall.
Oh yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Have you ever been there at night or no?
No.
So basically, after all the shops closed down in Colonial Williamsburg and all the other the restaurants and stuff, after they all close, there's literally no laws in place. You can just wander the streets. No one really does, but it's cool because you can wander all of Colonial Williamsburg just by yourself, and there ain't no one else out there. But it's not a roped off site. It's not like a historic site that they lock up for the night, and there's no entry/exit point. So you can kind of just go check out the place.
I'm in the roped off entry areas all the time.
Right. But in any case, went out to the old Gaul, the old jail, and we didn't really have proper ghost hunting equipment. It would be a neat novelty thing for me to own at some point in time, just because I think it's neat. And I've watched plenty of ghost hunting shows. Regardless of whether or not I believe in ghosts, I still like the premise and the concept is cool. So we didn't really have proper equipment out there. We just had, a crappy little phone app that, there ain't no validity to those things, probably. There's all those accusations, an app is just a pre-programmed thing. It's got words that, it listens to you. It tells you what you want to hear. It, could track GPS coordinates and, shout out words that are popular amongst the location's folklore or whatever. There's a whole bunch of claims as to how all those ghost hunting apps are actually programmed. But when we were out there, the ghost hunting app, it kept saying that we were there with the name John Riley. And, at the time, irrelevant. Never heard that name before. It's not part of any folklore. It's not mentioned anywhere. I've never heard of a John Riley associated with the area or anything. But I believe 3 separate times while we were there, probably for half an hour or something, over and over, it kept saying John Riley, John Riley. It's who's with us right now? It's John Riley. Okay, whatever. So it turns out afterwards, just for fun, we looked up the name John Riley and started trying to look into it. And there actually was a man named John Riley who is only mentioned once in an obscure an obscure newspaper article of the Virginia Gazette from 1776. And he was a runaway slave, and someone had basically put out a wanted ad for him. And the wanted ad was promising someone a payment of, it was 3 pistols and a collection of other things if they would be returned to him or delivered to any of His Majesty's jails. And that was from the Colonial Williamsburg area. I don't think it was the town itself. It was somewhere in the same county though.
Yeah.
We're okay, that's a neat little coincidence, if nothing else. Don't know why it would throw out the name John Riley, because it's not a name associated with that place even, but turns out it was a person. It was in that area. But that's probably one of my most interesting associations with the allegedly haunted places when it comes to the haunted aspect of the book. The other part is buried treasure. And with the buried treasure, for me, the most interesting place that I've actually been to for the book is not too far from here for Isle of Palms. I'm not sure if you came across the Cid Campeador story that
yes,
I believe
yes.
I mentioned to you.
Yes.
Yeah, that's one of my more favorite entries of the book. Um, I of course have like a number of favorites, but my favorite ones are the ones that have a bit more substance to them, and that one has a lot of substance. That one, for those of you listening, just to give a very brief description of it. The very brief description is that at some point in time, I believe 1740 or so, there was a Spanish privateer based out of St. Augustine, and some English merchants traveling along the Carolina coast between Charleston and Georgetown. Uh, what was it? One merchant was assaulted in the fog but escaped, and then another merchant noticed a brigantine up on its side from where it had run aground at, what was the place called? Now it's called Isle of Palms. I believe back then it was Sand Island or something, Sands Key. I'd have to look at it again, but
I read it and I'm trying to remember.
yeah. But in any case, went up to Georgetown. The merchants told people about what they had seen on the way there. They came back to check it out. Turns out it was a Spanish privateer. Again, out of St. Augustine around 1740. They were rounded up and quickly hauled back into downtown Charleston, where they were put into custody and afterwards received a trial. And during the trip between picking them up and taking them to Charleston, and also during the trial, the Spanish privateer, he kind of discloses what was going on. He mentioned that they had a load of gold that they were taking back to Spain. He and the crew, however, were deciding to keep it, and that they had buried it on what is now Isle of Palms. He provided very in-depth descriptions about where it was actually located, and one of the last bits of the trial is how do we say this? Him describing, no, the merchant who brought him into Charlestown offering to the probate judge something Gleason. He explains to him, he's like, I'll even go look for it. You can assign people with me. We can go find what the Spanish privateers put in there. And it's a very interesting story. It doesn't pop up until the early 1900s necessarily, but it all comes from the actual probate judge's manuscript of stuff that he had interacted with during his time as an acting judge in Charleston. It's a combination of those along with the newspaper reports of the merchants who actually discovered the Spanish privateer ship. So it's a combination of like eyewitness accounts and the transcripts from like the judge who oversaw the trial. The privateer's name was it's something De Vega, but he was a real person. His ship was a real ship. He kind of disappears from history right afterwards, after he's brought into Charleston and explains, hey, there's gold out there in Isle of Palms, and other people offer to go out there and get it. Like, all of them just stop existing in history, basically. So it's interesting. I've been out to Isle of Palms. I mean, it's I don't want to say it's not much to look at, but I mean, it's just yet another barrier island. It's got a long stretch of beach from top to bottom. But somewhere out there in the marsh, I believe on the northern end of the island is where it's supposed to be. So I would say that's one of the more interesting ghost ones that I've been to that actually had something kind of weird happen, and one of the more in-depth, interesting, one of the more interesting, in-depth buried treasure stories.
Mine keeps biting me if I don't pet her. That's why I keep going.
Gotcha. But yeah, I would say those are two of my favorite entries.
So, like, one of the big things I love about your book is how you break things down. Like, okay, this could not possibly have happened because of this, this, and this. There's
Right.
no source for this. What's this? And I love how you do that. So now here's what is your least favorite entry?
I've been waiting for this one too. I have two least favorite entries. Two least favorite entries. One of them is for Virginia, and they're my least favorites for two different reasons as well. One is for Virginia and one's for North Carolina. So the one in Virginia Out in the middle of the Chesapeake Bay, there's a small island called Tangier Island, and there are numerous claims about that little tiny island, but they're so vague and absolutely nothing to go on that I couldn't write an entry of like acceptable substance to me. I believe that island, there's like rumors that Blackbeard lived there, which was ridiculous. There was rumors that he buried treasure there. There's rumor that Blackbeard haunts the island for whatever reason. And there's also rumors that, what is it? Blackbeard's treasure lies somewhere between Tangier Island and one other nearby island. Those are straight up the claims, and you can't find anything else. Don't know where those claims originated. Like I tried really hard to dig into all of that and couldn't. So it is the shortest entry in the book. Like that's that. And sometimes that's unfortunately what it is. I knew that was probably going to happen at some point in time, but when I decided to write a book that was, meant to be a comprehensive collection of every single story, a lot of the times when you pick up local folklore books, they hyper focus on like, the 10 most interesting, the 10 that have the most amount of substance that you can actually write about.
Yeah.
Whereas mine has, every tiny little entry. Sometimes it's just a single newspaper entry. Sometimes it's a super vague claim like this. So not some entries are long. Some of them are multiple pages. Some of them are like 5 or 6 pages long, but other ones like this, it's like struggle to get a paragraph out, but that's just how it is. I mean, you have the same way if you decide to start writing a history article about like a particular person or subject, and there just isn't enough to write about that person. Like the only thing you can fall into is describing events surrounding that time period, describing that location, and trying to contextualize it somewhat by just pulling stuff out of the hat. It's like you don't really have anything more to say about that person, but you can describe things about that place. So that's one of my least favorite entries, just because of how short it is.
Yeah.
Which is, in my defense, no fault of my own. But when it comes down to the other one has to do with North Carolina. And that one is, the folklore is known as the House of Beckoning Hands. And the premise of it is, first off, the reason why I'm not a big fan of it is it feels out of place. It is very campfire story-ish. It seems like it has been cobbled together by a bunch of unrelated stories and passed off as this folklore tale. It has to do with the fact that there was a pirate, and he arrived to one of the Outer Banks Islands, and he kidnaps a child. The child is actually the daughter of a witch, and he presses the child into service on his ship. The witch curses him so that he will never become a grandfather. Not a father, but a grandfather. So he goes off to sea. He does stuff. His wife ends up not feeling comfortable with him being a criminal, his life at sea. So in the meantime, he still devotes riches to building a house. Not just a house, but a mansion. Not by the coast or anything, but super far inland along a river. A big Victorian mansion, basically. She refuses. She has a daughter, his child, but they refuse to move into the house. And it's because she doesn't respect his morality or something like that. In any case, he eventually dies at sea. And then afterwards, she's like, you know what? Well, I mean, it's a free house. He's not going to come back. So the wife and the daughter move into the Victorian mansion, and everything's fine for a while. The daughter grows up, and then she eventually tries to get married. However, during her wedding day, she doesn't show up. All the wedding guests have a hard time trying to figure out what happened to her. She can't have gone far. Everyone just saw her previously that day getting ready for the wedding. and then they can't find her. Uh, Years and years pass, and people say that the mansion's grounds are haunted by the pirate's daughter. Eventually, there's a man who decides to take an interest in the property. He he purchases the property, lives there, has a dream that the pirate's daughter is entombed in a wall, and then when he wakes up, he goes and checks it, and turns out it's true. She's entombed in the wall. He then gives her a proper burial, and then there's pretty much no more sightings of the pirate's daughter's ghost. And that's the whole premise of the story.
Hmm.
It's very disjointed. Most things are left unanswered. And like I addressed this in the book in the notes section as well. It feels disjointed. There's no resolution to that whole witch curse thing. There's no resolution as to why the pirate's daughter ends up entombed in a wall. There's no like seemingly moral of the story. Like it serves no purpose. uh, but yeah, it very much so feels like someone took like a Victorian ghost story and then like tried to cram the pirate theme into it, and then like also decided to shove a witch into it because witches are cool or something. I don't know how that came to be. I had a hard time tracking down the origin of that one as well. But that is definitely not something that like originates from, you know, the 1800s, or probably not even the 1900s. I'm pretty sure that's like within the last 20 years that someone tried to get this circulating. But yeah, two
Wow.
least favorite. That one's just a pile of ridiculousness. Everything else has like interesting history associated with it. But this is supposed to be like somewhere up along the Chowan River. It's supposed to be like on a bluff overlooking the Chowan River, and the Chowan River is like 70 miles long or something like that. And like I can't even pinpoint like where the bluff would be. So who knows? Who cares?
There's, yeah, well, with your Chesapeake Bay one,
Yeah.
every time I like try to look up, like supposedly this was a pirate site and this was a pirate site.
Mhm.
A lot of times what happens is I find out later on there was a French privateer who had been in the area.
Talking about
Or
Louis
then,
Vuitton.
yeah. And there's apparently another one too that keeps popping up that I don't know if it was Guitar, like they just gave him a different name, or if it was somebody else. And
Yeah.
then during the American Revolution, there were privateers in the area.
Mm-hmm.
And then there was the whole Oyster War thing, which that went from the 19th century upwards, and that involved technically piracy.
Mm-hmm.
And I sometimes think like something with pirates did happen, but when the story got like some grandfather's telling his grandkid, and the grandkid's like, so like Blackbeard? Yeah, like Blackbeard. So Blackbeard was there.
Yeah.
And that's what they tell their kids.
Yeah, that comes up a decent amount from all the research into all the folklore a lot. There's plenty of situations where it's like, oh, you know, pirates were said to have done this here, and you come into situations where it's like, well, I mean, there were Spanish privateers that did a thing here, or like, oh, well, there was an English buccaneer that showed up at some point in time, but it's just like the more what's the word, not regulated, but the folklore that continually keeps being mentioned over and over, like by a certain point in time, like folklore has forgotten the specifics, it's forgotten the names, so you end up with just broad accusations. Like you said, it's like, oh yeah, pirates were here and they did a thing. It's like, oh, pirates buried treasure here, that's so cool. But like a lot of the times they don't have a name associated, and like I've come into situations where it's like, okay, someone said Blackbeard, but really there was a dude here that was a pirate, and Blackbeard was never here. So that exact scenario has popped up for me.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, just wait till you, if you do a second book on like my area, just wait till you get to Delaware and you can find Canute, like the Viking. But apparently it was a real French privateer who was raiding the Delaware coast. And
Okay.
I think it was Louis Guitar, because it was the
Okay.
same time period, same general area.
Mhm.
but for some reason it was recorded as Canute. I'm like, yes, Canute rose from the dead and had a Viking raid against Delaware.
I believe I've seen the name. So I guess for anyone watching, book 2 is already over half done regarding the Northeast coast. The first book, since it hasn't been mentioned yet, the first book stretches from Florida's western panhandle down to the Keys and all the way up to Virginia's shores of the Chesapeake Bay. The second book takes off from Maryland and its other half of the Chesapeake Bay, going all the way up to Newfoundland. So I've come across stuff for that book while I've been working on the first one, and that second book is at this point definitely already over half done. So I've come across Canute already. So it's, what is the reason that you think it's Louis Guitar is the same person as Canute? Like that's a lead I can look into.
Same pirate, same region. Like well, not same pirate, same region, same nationality.
Okay.
And it's just the name doesn't really come up anywhere else from what I found. Like I try to Google it, and it's like I try to go to JSTOR and look it up. It's like, oh, the Viking. No, not the Viking. A French guy who raided Delaware.
Yeah, I know Chesapeake Bay has also had other interactions before with Dutch privateers. I know there was a huge thing with the Dutch. When was that? 1680s or something, 1670s. I remember reading into that at some point. Yeah, Chesapeake Bay has a lot of pirate history. But yeah, so that's the plan. Book 2 is on the way. Not sure how long it'll take me to finish it, but it won't take me 4.5 years, that's for sure. This one took so long because first time writing a book, a lot of hassles about editing and formatting and having to learn, I guess, the whole process in the first place. Plus, like I said, all the other side projects I've had going on as well. And with the second one, from this point, it's already over halfway done. Like, I'm going to try and knock it out within a year. We'll see. We'll see. What else? What else you got here?
Oh, okay. So now you know my opinion on the large chunk of the book.
Mm-hmm.
So on this question, you know what my answer would be. So I'm going to ask it to you. What is the most annoying thing with some of these folk tales for you?
The most annoying thing.
I'm gonna ask the follow-up question that's the opposite. So
all right. So the most annoying thing, that's gonna have to be, I think this is more of like a writer's gripe, but I'm sick of typing the word Blackbeard. So there's that. It's not annoying. I understand he has folklore everywhere in every state and the Caribbean and everywhere else. I'm sure he's buried treasure in Alaska. I'm sure someone's claimed that.
There is a Russian pirate who buried treasure in Alaska.
Oh yeah, there's a whole documentary on that. Yep. So annoying. I don't really think that I've ever personally felt annoyed by any of the folklore. I've felt disappointed sometimes. There's a number of times where you end up with a piece of folklore and it sounds really cool when you start trying to research into it, only to discover where like a tour guide of the area, admits that he made it up back in like 2006 or something. You're like, okay, well, there's that dead end. Next entry. So there's been situations like that where, something can seem really cool and like be an engaging story. And like when you look at it on the surface, it sounds kind of plausible. But then the more you dig and the deeper you get, you start uncovering bits and pieces that start to disprove it. And you're like, oh, I was wanting to believe in this one. So there's stuff like that. Like I said, I've been disappointed, but not necessarily annoyed.
In case anybody was wondering, I find a lot of the false information just because I have to fight through it. This is history, people. This is what the real thing was.
Right.
Of course, I wouldn't have this channel if everything was good. So.
Right. What was I going to say about I know you're also not typically a fan of folklore in general, which is interesting
I
that you ended up
I'm
enjoying the book and
okay with
have me on.
folklore. Like I count folklore. Oh, it came out of the 1700s. Cool, cool. It came from your Uncle Jim in the 1950s. No, I don't care. Just no. Oh,
Right.
your cousins, brothers, sisters. No, 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 no. Keep it away from me.
I also prefer the older ones. The older ones, like, even if they don't have much more to go on, at least it's fun that they're a period source.
Yeah.
Which it actual 18th century claims, at least for down here in the Southeast, are admittedly far and few between. I have a number of them in the book, but typically pirate folklore, a lot of it pops up during the 1800s. Uh, it isn't always after Treasure Island gets published. A lot of it happens prior to that. Treasure Island wasn't the first thing that ever came out to popularize the concept of pirates burying treasure and stuff. There's plenty of other short stories that came out before then, Edgar Allan Poe with the Gold Bug, and plenty of other small short stories that led to the rise of popularity of the concept. So there are a bunch of entries that are at least from the 1800s, and it's at least cool. That's like, okay, this is a treasure story from 1827. That is cooler than coming across a pirate folklore story, trying to track it back as far as you can, and you're like, all right, well, this comes from a golfing resort site from their website in 2014 and nowhere else. It doesn't go deeper than that. This is where it originated. So at least the older ones are cooler. I agree with that.
Like honestly, there's times where I'll find an excellent source and I'll be reading it and I'll be like, oh, it's from the Victorian era. I lose
Yeah,
my trust in it.
and that's something I did with my book. Is I was inspired by another history book that I read at one point, where instead of them shoving all the sources into the very back of the book for you to go back and reference and flip back to the chapter, instead, after every entry in the history book, they had all the sources for that entry right there. And I really liked that, as a person who reads a whole bunch of history books and who writes history stuff. Like, I was like, okay, here's the entry. And then before we leave this topic and go on to the next one, here's where it all came from. And yeah, you can skim it and you can see what year all these sources came from. So I did the same with my book. So you
I
would be
love
reading
that. That
over
was good. That was good.
yeah, you read over a folklore tale. Okay, that sounds pretty cool. You look down at the source, oh yeah, golf resort 2014. Noted. Next one.
All right, so we only got a few minutes left here.
Yep.
If you were to give to tour guides, historic sites, anybody else when it comes to dealing with folklore, what would be your best advice other than buy your book? Because I think it would be really good in those gift shops, just FYI.
I'm trying to get the book out there. I've already got a few places wanting to pick it up and stock it. So that's good. So advice regarding folklore?
Yeah.
Like
how to present it where it's not going to be
hokey,
misused.
Okay. I get, who's the person asking for advice? Is it a tour guide coming to me,
if
or
you're
a
it's
local
a tour guide coming to you, a historic site? I mean, I work with a lot of historic sites that they'll have their folklore. It's that's not true, right? What?
So, I mean, if it was an actual historic site or a museum or some such, I mean, the best advice that I would have regarding folklore is I wouldn't omit it, but if you do include it, make use of words that are in my book that I unfortunately had to overuse. There was only so many synonyms for allegedly, supposedly, reportedly, claimed, rumored to be. It's fine to include folklore and historic sites and mention it or even elaborate on, as long as you include those words. Or if, of course, the folklore has completely been misproven, maybe note that as well, instead of letting people potentially believe in it. That would be my advice regarding historic sites and museums. My advice to, I don't know what my advice to a tour guide would be. If a tour guide were to come to me and ask for advice on folklore, I mean, yes, I would point them to my book, but I'm trying to figure out. I don't want to sound like I'm against tour guides.
Hey, I've done it
But
before.
but 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 I address it in the book as well. A lot of folklore originates from tour guides. Um, and it has to come down to the fact that people, take a ghost story or a haunted pub crawl or whatever. They go on those tours and they give their money. And bottom line is they want to be entertained. When you talk about ghost stories, it's impossible to talk about a ghost story without inserting some element of history. But whatever you say, there isn't anyone there in that group countering you with historical reasons as to why your tale is false. So a lot
when
of the
they do, they're
times,
usually the really nasty ones
yeah,
and not the fun conversation ones.
right. So when it comes down to tour guides and stuff, like the tour guides that get paid and tipped the best are by the people who had the most entertaining time on their tour. Like, oh, we really love this. Your tales were super engaging. We especially love that spooky pirate ghost story. So like people go on those types of tours not for history. They go on them to be entertained. It's never explained to those people that like this wasn't historically factual. So then you start having people talking to their family about like this ghost tour they went on and like, how this place was haunted. And then they tell their friend at the bar, like that's how folklore spreads. It originates from somewhere. And
Or
sometimes
they tell
it's a
their
tourist
kid.
trying to make a buck.
Or they tell their
Yes.
kid, and then their kid will come up to me in an event. Well, my mom said, well, that's not
Well,
you're
your
calling my
mom was
mom a
wrong.
liar. No, what but where's your mom here?
Right. And yeah, I guess the other thing is that children are impressionable as well. You'll have a child who will hear like a ghost story, and sometimes that'll stick with them throughout their entire childhood. And they'll tell it to their kids later on, like, "Oh, I grew up knowing this place was haunted, and this was a cool thing I heard when I was a kid." Like, it doesn't take much for folklore to get started. Bottom line, like technically, I could make something up. I mean, I didn't for my book. Everything's provided with sources. I didn't come up with anything, but technically you could just come up with something and put it in there and say that people believe in this, and then you start telling other people about it, and like that's how it spreads.
I'm not going to name
that's
names, but
that's how history spreads.
I am on record with a historic site. I'm not saying the site,
Mhm.
reporting a ghost. Me.
Okay, all right.
Middle of the night, a disconnected payphone. Keep in mind, a payphone that was disconnected, had been
Mhm.
disconnected for years, randomly started ringing.
Okay,
We answered it. There was nobody there.
spooky.
It was about 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock in the morning. And it was just like, and everybody's, we got to report this. I'm like, I'd rather, oh, nope. Now my name's on this. Oh, no.
So the historic site, they're trying to get like what, paranormal investigators to come out or something, or
Oh, yeah.
are they
That's like,
just
that's what their big money making.
okay? So now they're like a haunted site. Now that's their big money maker.
Oh, they've been, but that was just adding to it. Like, a
Gotcha.
skeptic spotted something. I'm like, I don't know
Historian,
what it was. Maybe it was a prank. I'll go with a prank.
right?
All
But
right.
yeah,
Well,
but yeah, it doesn't take much for folklore to get started.
so got to finish this up now.
Yep.
So thank you for doing this interview with me. I mean, I have loved the book. I mean, like this,
Appreciate it.
I'm allowing you to have this space on my channel for crying
Thank you.
out loud. So,
Happy to be here. But yeah,
thank you.
I
And
appreciate you being on here. Well, I appreciate me being on here, and hope the book does well. Again, it comes out on September 19th, which is Talk Like a Pirate Day. I'm sure you and all the reenactors love Talk Like a Pirate Day.
are,
Are indeed.
well, you
All
have a
right.
good night.
All right, you too.